Dr. Elie Friedman discusses the political climate in Israel leading up to elections. He highlighted the recent initiation of a process to dissolve the Knesset due to Prime Minister Netanyahu's failure to advance a draft law that would exempt ultra-orthodox seminary students from military service. Netanyahu's low popularity is attributed to unfulfilled promises of victory against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, and his refusal to take responsibility for the October 7th Hamas attack. Polls show a tight race between Likud and the new political alliance called Together, with potential coalition challenges due to the Arab parties.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Elie Friedman, a researcher of political communication at Ashkelon Academic College in Israel. And I've been asked by our friends at ERPIC to give kind of a survey or an input of the current political climate in Israel with elections approaching. So I will do the best I can to sort of summarize some complex issues because nothing is ever very simple in our political climate. So actually, I'm speaking to you on, or I'm recording this on May 14th, and actually just yesterday, May 13th, a process began in the Israeli parliament in what's called the Knesset to disperse the Knesset, where actually the coalition parties themselves began a process that will take a few days in which the Knesset will be dispersed and they will agree upon an election date. So this was, there's so many divisive issues in Israel, but this actual dispersal of the Knesset is based on a specific issue, which maybe is not so much on the international strategic agenda, which is the issue of a law that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been promising that he'll pass for years, actually, to his ultra-orthodox partners, which would basically allow the ultra-orthodox seminary or what's called yeshiva students to avoid being drafted. And basically, Netanyahu informed his ultra-orthodox partners a few days ago that he was not going to advance this law because elections are approaching anyway, because this would be a very unpopular law and probably damage his popularity among constituents. And therefore, the ultra-Orthodox party said, we are going to start the process of dispersal of the Knesset as a way of sort of signaling to their electorate that they're not giving in on this very important issue to them, and that they will not continue to cooperate with a coalition that has been postponing passing this law for actually years. Now, this is really symbolic because in any event, the date of elections would have been the end of October. Now it will be probably somewhere in the middle of September. That has yet to be that will be determined in the next few days. And currently, Netanyahu, who, as I'm sure you're aware, has been Prime Minister of Israel for a very long time, the longest serving Prime Minister in Israel, he's really entering this election in probably the worst shape that he's ever approached an election. Now, of course, there are several months until the election would take place, and several things could happen, but his current popularity is quite low for a number of reasons. Really, the main one is that the promise that Netanyahu made to the Israeli public following the October 7th attack of total victory against primarily Hamas, but also Hezbollah, and more recently with the very mixed results of the Iran war, this promise of total victory has not really come to fruition. Hamas still exists, of course, quite weakened in Gaza, but they're rearming and they're still basically the governing authority there, at least in the part of Gaza that they control. Hezbollah, which during the previous ceasefire in 2024 with Hezbollah, Netanyahu basically said, the threat is done. Hezbollah is no longer a serious threat, and that has been proved to be inaccurate as they made the lives of Israel's northern residents very, very difficult during the last Iran war, which took place just a couple of months ago. And of course, Iran, right? There was maybe not said specifically, but at least insinuated the idea that regime change was a real possibility and that this was the goal. And of course, this has not happened. And currently, it's really unclear what will happen if an agreement that will involve removing Iran's enriched uranium from their soil, if that will happen, if there'll be a return to war. But Iran sort of giving up all of their assets, all of their military and strategic assets does not seem in the cards right now, and they perhaps even feel emboldened by the results of the war. So the total victory kind of thesis has not come to fruition. Also, there's a lot of anger at Netanyahu about basically refusing to take any kind of personal responsibility for the October 7th Hamas attack. Everyone else who is in a position of power has left their position. The defense minister, the chief of staff, IDF chief of staff, the head of the Shin Bet intelligence organization, and others. But Netanyahu has not resigned, of course, and has basically deflected responsibility and also refused to form an independent commission of inquiry, which would be a commission of inquiry that would be led by a retired Supreme Court judge, which is kind of the tradition in Israel when there's a national travesty, and he has refused this on several grounds. Um, There's also been, I mentioned a few minutes ago, this issue of the draft law, and that would, well, depends what kind of a draft law, but there's a lot of pressure, also from the Israel Defense Forces, from the army itself, to draft many ultra-orthodox seminary students. Because of a lack of manpower, particularly since we have the northern front is not quiet. Gaza, the West Bank, the Iran issue, the army does not have enough manpower to have these continuous wars that have really sort of dominated Israel's agenda for the last 3 years. Many men, particularly in their 20s and their 30s, are doing hundreds of days of reserve duty, which is something that's really really terrible for their family life, for their economic life. If they're business owners, this kind of ruins their businesses. And there's a lot of anger that Netanyahu has kind of, I mean, he hasn't passed a law that would allow for these seminary students to evade draft, but he also hasn't done anything to draft these seminary students. So there's a lot of anger at this. And I think there's also just a lot of sort of fatigue at Netanyahu's various elements of himself and his government have a lot of corruption aspects that have been sort of tailing them, including a very serious allegation of his media, of particularly one advisor, one strategic media advisor, who also simultaneously worked for the country of Qatar and received a salary from Qatar, which is a very controversial state that has also funded Hamas for several years. So, and this is just one of the many different corruption issues. So Netanyahu is not in good shape right now. I'd just like to show you a couple of polling ideas. Now, this may, of course, change in the next few months. But right now, we have in this specific poll, this is by Channel 12 News, Biyachad, which is this new party led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, which I'll explain who they are in a minute, is neck and neck with Likud, Netanyahu's party. You have another kind of centrist party called Yashar, which means straight, led by a former chief of staff at 14 seats here. the Democrats, which is a left-wing Zionist party, at 11 seats, and several other parties that will be important in terms of coalition forming. Now, what you see on the right here, and this is in Hebrew, but I'll just very simply explain it. What you have in the blue is the Netanyahu bloc. So these are the parties that have traditionally supported Netanyahu, only polling at 52 seats, which is quite far from the 61 you would need to form a majority, whereas the opposition bloc, which is in the orange here, is polling at 57 seats, which is still less than the 61, right? So what's missing here? In this sort of gray, we have the Arab parties. And this is going to be an important issue in terms of, will any side be able to form a government? It's possible to be in a stalemate. I'll explain in a minute the issue of these Arab parties and what it means in terms of um, coalition politics. So as I mentioned, the biggest contender is this party called Biyachad, which means together, which is being led by a person who was prime minister quite briefly, Naftali Bennett, who was a right-wing candidate, and he's joined forces with a centrist candidate, Yair Lapid, and they formed basically a kind of center-right slate. And in a way, this is based on the notion that Israeli public is no longer left-wing, small left-wing constituency, and only a right-wing candidate could unseat Netanyahu. And this is a party that's positioning itself as basically hawkish on defense issues and foreign policy, but relatively liberal on domestic issues, not corrupt, like perhaps the Likud party, and less divisive, more attempting to aim for more of a national unity approach. In a way, they're modeling themselves to some extent on the Hungarian model, where the candidate who finally unseated Viktor Orban, Peter Magyar, was also a right-wing candidate, but a different kind of right-wing than the Orban style of kind of populism and attempts to sort of, in a way, destroy certain elements of democracy, which is the way Netanyahu is also in some ways being perceived today. So this center-right slate is like I said, hawkish on defense and foreign policy issues, but much more in tune with sort of Israelis who want a strong democracy, who want a separation of powers. And some of their main campaign promises are, first of all, the idea of setting up a commission of inquiry about October 7th, which is quite popular in Israel, issuing a law that would draft all youth that are between of the age of draft, meaning not giving this automatic exemption to ultra-orthodox seminary students, and also drafting a constitution, right? And this is also based on the notion that, particularly before October 7th, the issue of changing the balance of power between the executive, legislature, and judiciary was a major bone of contention in Israel. And the Bennett's party is basically saying, let's draft a constitution, and then we won't have these constant battles about the relative powers of the branches of democracy. In terms of the Likud campaign, I haven't seen much of a real campaign yet, other than just basically saying that our opposition is left wing and will join forces with the Arab parties. So basically a fair campaign. I don't know that they have that much to offer, other than Netanyahu also continuously says we're changing the face of the Middle East, but it seems to be an ongoing thing that hasn't quite reached that total victory that he's promised already a few years ago. However, if I can refer back to the chart that I just showed a minute ago, it appears that Bennett and his partner Lapid have kind of fallen into the trap of are saying that they will not coalition with the Arab parties. They say they will only form a coalition with what they call Zionist parties, uh, in a way as a reaction to the fear-mongering campaign of Likud that's saying, oh, they're going to um, form a coalition with the Arab parties. In my mind, this is a mistake because it also legitimizes that kind of racist discourse, where the experience in the past, during the previous Bennett government, there was an Arab party in the coalition, and the cooperation was actually quite productive. Um, but there's a kind of a fear that exists among Israel's Jewish electorate, and they've made this kind of campaign promise that they will only form a coalition with Zionist parties. But as you saw in the graph, in the chart that I showed you, the mathematics may be quite problematic. They may not be able to get 61 seats without at least one Arab party. One other point that I want to make about the campaign is that I think it's quite unfortunate that a major lesson of the last 3 years, um, that has not really been internalized, and no one is really giving voice to this message in the campaign. And I would say this lesson, or the lesson that should have been learned, is that Israel cannot change the strategic reality through military moves alone. There's no total victory without a diplomatic agenda, which of course relates to the Palestinian issue. And again, just like many other elections in the past decade, the Palestinian issue is basically being ignored by most of the major parties. Um, right? The main party that is competitive to Netanyahu is putting more internal issues in the center, like the issue of a constitution, which of course is important, the issue of the draft, and the issue of a commission of inquiry on October 7th. But the Palestinian issue is basically being ignored under the idea that it would, if there was a sort of a strong statement on the Palestinian issue, it may cause fear among right-wing constituents. Really, the only party that is putting that issue on the agenda is the left-wing Democrats Party, which is a new party that is a combination of what was in the past the Labour Party and the further left-wing Meretz Party. So they're running on a joint ticket. And the leader of this party, Yair Golan, who was a former army man, he was the deputy chief of staff. He and his the other members of Knesset have said that they want to advance a kind of a regional um, peace conference that would create a kind of a regional solution to the Palestinian issue, perhaps step by step, not immediately jumping to a Palestinian state, but basically an approach that's based on the Arab Peace Initiative. Um, but they're a small party, and he won't be a prime minister. So it's possible that the Palestinian issue will continue to be kind of ignored, or just in this kind of conflict management scenario, which has dominated the Israeli agenda for several years. Um, Now, I mentioned that Netanyahu is not in good shape in the polls, but we definitely cannot count him out. He's a master campaigner. He knows how to sort of pull tricks, pull rabbits out of his hat. Um, and there may also be various attempts to kind of tamper with election results by perhaps disqualifying certain parties that would benefit the pro-Netanyahu bloc. They're not going to, they're not going to sort of say, okay, we're polling badly and we'll just sort of let the other side win. No, it's going to be a very ugly and difficult battle, and there may be various elements that try to sort of tamper with election results. Um, Currently, Netanyahu is polling at around 25 seats with seats, which I actually find that kind of amazing that he's even reaching that level, because this has been probably the most difficult period in Israel's history, perhaps since even the War of Independence, in terms of just having this ongoing war on several fronts that has has had such a major cost in terms of the economy, in terms of people's social well-being, and of course in terms of all of the casualties. So he still has his constituents that will vote for him, even if the situation is not very good, and the goals have not really been achieved. So that's currently, in mid-May 2026, the scenario. It could change over the next number of months. We are still quite early, but we are entering the election season, and we'll see how things develop. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found this informative.